So without further ado, Matt, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you to get started.
Thank you. Thank you. And for those that don't know me, Matt Queasley with Reserve Advisors, been doing reserve studies for 25 years, a professional engineer, professional reserve analyst, and a reserve specialist. All that to say is we do a lot of reserve studies and now a lot of structural integrity reserve studies. We work throughout the United States. We actually work in 50 states and 30 countries. So we've got a lot of experience as a team to draw on. But here today to really talk about what we've learned, give a little bit of background and hopefully get a lot of kind of questions answered and think a little bit about what's next for our communities in this industry. I think it's a very lucky Friday the 13th today to be joined by two of the just champions in our industry in our Florida Senate. Senator Pizzo represents Broward area, and Senator Bradley, who represents I think it's Clay County and some northern areas. And I'll let you guys do more introduction, but first I'm going to turn it over to Travis, who is a true champion as well in his own right for the condo world and the condo industry. Travis, maybe you mind giving just a little bit of background of where we are, how we got here, and just kind of set the table for what the requirements are as of today, just for those that may not be fully up to speed.
Sure. And it'll be very quick. And again, I appreciate Senator Bradley and Senator Pizzo joining us because they have, as you pointed out, really led since the moment we were struck with tragedy here in Florida. From literally within minutes of that happening, they've been just literally on the ground working these issues. And so thanks to both of them, it's not they have not forgotten. They have not just said, here, we're moving on to other important issues for the state. This is something that they've continued to try to get right because it's so vitally important to so many Floridians. Florida has always had required reserves for condominiums, and we're focusing just on condominiums today. We've always said that there's these categories of things that you must reserve for, and followed what so other states, 9 other states at the time, have had required reserves. But then we were the easiest of those states to allow. Our threshold was the lowest for waiving them. So it was a tool that longstanding for decades and decades had been part of our Condo Act. And so we said to associations, if you just get a majority of the owners that show up, at a meeting, so a quorum of a meeting, which is a very low threshold per docs, you can waive or partially reduce. And so a lot of folks who were either investor owners, were not looking at a condo as a long-term real estate purchase for them or asset for them, they would systematically, again, using a tool. So we're not putting, they didn't do anything illegal, but they just waived those reserves. So part of the requirements that we passed after the Champlain Towers crisis was, number one, we're going to figure out we need to make sure all these buildings are safe. So kind of that baseline, where are we with buildings? So we took something that is always, or not always, but for a long time standing policy for Miami-Dade and Broward County to have these threshold buildings, meaning buildings that have been built and have been occupied and used, to have them inspected. So we took a really just a subset of what they were required to do for many years. And we said, we're now going to apply that across the board to all 67 of Florida's counties. And somebody needs to be going in and giving this building a look and just making sure there's no, chunks of concrete have fallen out of the parking garage ceiling, et cetera. So that was one portion of that. And then it was to make sure that going forward, that the building is safe going forward, to make sure that the value of the building is maintained, because you're maintaining the maintenance of that asset. So just like any other thing that you have, like a car or a classic car, if you maintain it, it's going to be worth more than if you just left it out in a field. We also put those components in. And so that's now where we are. We've given several years really to get to that. So we are now at that portion of making sure that we have collected. You first of all need to get your building inspected if you're at 30 years of age or older in as part of that milestone inspection. But then now making sure you're putting money going forward. So that's kind of where we are, and that goes to the poll, Matt, that you highlighted, like just where are we in that process. And I will just mention in closing that I feel good because it's important to get data, and I like the fact that I think it was like 37% are fully funding those reserve amounts for this year. Again, doesn't mean you have to have all of the money that you're going to need for that roof in 4 years now, but you are following a path, and I think that's going to be help with the value of your building immensely going forward. Not just that the value, but the safety.
Thank you. And Senator Pizzo, I've heard you speak passionately about this. Can you share with our audience today why this is so important to Florida condominium owners and boards and all of us that live, the half of the state of Florida that lives in a community association?
Sure. And thanks, Matt. And thanks for including Senator Bradley and I. And this is professional and personal. Prior to being elected office, I was actually a prosecutor, and I handled shootings and homicides, very violent cases, but always sort of in the background were a number of issues as it related to really to housing. Everything from the rental market to a lot of fraud and corruption that we saw in the condo market. A grand jury was convened shortly after I left and ran for office. And what came out of that was just really a plea from the grand jury participants to do something about condos, about transparency and accountability, to give people like real snapshots and a real understanding of where they are in this space. Appreciating, though, that regardless of how talented and brilliant someone might be in their particular profession, once they got together collectively as a board, they're still volunteers. And there really is no professional board member, so to speak of, even if they've been on forever. And then ran for office, and from that grand jury report, filed a bill, my first session here, legislative session in Tallahassee, and spoke to transparency and accountability, had some attendant penalties that were a little bit more harsh than people were used to. It wasn't received very well. Then filed it the following year, got a little bit of success on it, but ultimately did not pass. And then in the 15 cities I was representing at the time in 2021, one of them was Surfside. A building collapses, 90 of my constituents die, and that was a pretty traumatic experience, even for someone with my background in as a prosecutor in violent crime. Then my colleagues sort of realized that we had to do something. We had to take a look at a statute really that had been tweaked and minorly treated or addressed over the years, but nothing really substantial and substantive to track current trends and what the problems were. I am the only one of the 40 state senators that serve in the upper chamber of the third largest state in the country that lives in a condo. So these are very personal issues. I have a packet over here, one for voting on a board and another one for another unit that I have in Sunny Isles, asking if we want to continue to partially waive reserves. So I know what box I'll be checking on that one. I can only vote once, even though I'd like to vote a couple times on that one. So it's very personal, and which segues nice into probably just one of the most gracious and intelligent people you're ever going to meet, who happens to be a state senator, my colleague, Senator Bradley.
Yeah, and yeah, Senator Bradley, to you, I mean, you've been tireless in your discussions of this, and I think maybe can give a little bit of background why it's so important to you, and maybe take it a little further. Just I was part of your the conference that you did with the FICPA, and really starting to grasp on this, and maybe some of your concerns. We can kind of turn to that concerns of things that well. People have concerns, but first, what are the positive outcomes that have come from the legislation that has been passed and is in place that you see?
Yeah, well, thank you, Matt, and thank you, Senator Pizzo and Travis, for being on this. I think it's really important to just keep having these conversations. In 2020, I was the chair of the Community Affairs Committee in the Florida Senate, the jurisdiction of which is the Florida Building Commission. So when the state sort of watched in horror as Surfside fell and 98 people died, that was the jurisdiction of the committee that I chaired. And it was clear that we needed to make sure that our buildings in Florida were safe. Senator Pizzo was on the ground, spent an incredible amount of time helping the families and really highlighting a lot of the issues in condos. And so for the first 2 years, we passed legislation with regard to building safety and their financial health, the milestone and the SIRS. last year really built on the work that Senator Pizzo had started years ago, which was with regard to the governance issues and the, combating the fraud and transparency, so that you actually had good functioning boards that could navigate these new requirements. And that really brings us to where we are today, where you have associations that are now completing those milestones, completing those SIRS studies, trying to, as with any implementation, you need to see how it plays out and then look to see how you can improve it and how you can make it easier for people to comply. And that's what we will continue to do this session. I think the net effect, once we get through some of these transitional, growing pains, I think that as we look into the future, you will see condos that are more transparent, that are well run, that are safe, that have reserves. There's not going to be issues. If you have huge structural issues, you're not going to sit for 3 and 4 years looking for money to be able to shore up columns, which is ultimately what we saw tragically happen at Surfside. So in the future, we will have safe condos, money in reserves, and a more stable, stronger condo market.
Absolutely, and we'll hopefully never know, and we'll never know for sure. But multiple buildings have been evacuated. We've found some serious conditions at some of our buildings that I think may not have been recognized without this prompting of the legislature to do that. You mentioned that at the condo summit, right? There's been a number of buildings that have been problematic, but a very small number, but a number nonetheless.
Right. Well, throughout the state of Florida, Miami-Dade and Broward already had what was called recertification, which was the template for the statewide milestone inspection. Now, those jurisdictions, their recertification is actually a little bit broader than what the state requires, but that milestone inspection now we're seeing in 65 new counties. This is new for 65 counties in Florida. And as those milestones were being completed, to your point, we have seen 24 evacuations. That doesn't mean 24 buildings are still evacuated, but the owners had to leave so that columns could be shored up. Obviously, rose to the level that the engineer and the building department felt that it was appropriate to evacuate people from their homes. So I'm absolutely think it's the right thing to do to make sure that we get experts and professionals in there to look at these buildings. We have a building code for when they're constructed, but in a lot of these old coastline buildings that could be 55, 60 years old, there's never been a requirement to have an engineer or a professional walk through and say, hey, these balconies are about to, are unsafe. These railings could fall off. This is, you have rotting wood under here. That's important. That keeps people safe.
For sure, and I think there's communities around the globe that are facing that reality of now we've got buildings that are 50 years old, 60 years, 100 years old. At what point, are we going to re-inspect this and make sure that it's safe for occupancy instead of leaving it up to the individual owners to do that? So
yeah, 30 years. 30 years is the answer to that.
30 years is a great answer and a great smart. And then every 10 years thereafter, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that's critical. And I think a lot of our societies throughout the world, again, maybe not just condos, but other types of buildings, other types of structures, right? The Department of Transportation has a bridge inspection program. Why? Because we realize that bridges aren't going to last 100 years without being inspected. So kind of just a continuation of that. Now, you guys have been really involved with a lot of boards, and you go to a lot of board meetings, which amazes me, and I'm very impressed by it. But what have you heard from your constituents on kind of the biggest obstacles or challenges with the new legislation? Senator Pizzo, maybe you go first on that one.
Yeah, I think some of it has to do with, and there's a reason why you were included when we were trying to get stakeholders and your peers together for best practices. A lot of it has to do with disparate treatment or interpretation of what should be plain reading. Shortly before our summit, I have, I think 65% of my district are condos. We have 600,000 constituents. I think I've been to 25 or 26 board meetings and locations or condo locations probably in the past 90 days alone. And it's been like that pretty steady for 6 years. this is the first time over the last couple of years that many of my constituents have noticed that we've heeded the call of anything related to condos. So I think a lot of it is misinformation, lack or inconsistency in interpretation. Just in preparation for the summit, Senator Bradley came in the night before, and we actually went to a board meeting. We went to a few board meetings. We went to the first board meeting was, the owners are like, listen, we're not saying we don't have to pay these things. We just want to see records, and we're not going to agree to anything until we see bids and loan negotiation documents and any of these things. And they still weren't being provided. And the second night, as we're gluttons for this, we went to a board meeting where they were having a vote the next day to basically oust all of the board members because they were being saddled with a multi-million-dollar assessment. And Senator Bradley and I are always candid, and I think people appreciate the candor. And we took a look at some of the itemization of the things they had on there. And it actually looked okay. It was okay. It was within the spirit of what we enumerated in the bill and what we asked for. However, we'll go to another association. I had one in Hallandale, 1,249 units, $50+ million assessment. And inside and under the guise and using that color of authority of a structural integrity reserve study, they're including pool furniture and, basketball courts. And those are maybe important amenities and accoutrement to have in a condo association, not necessary to sustain life, and certainly not within either the spirit or the letter of the law. So we walked out of one association meeting where there was a contemplated $51 or $52 million assessment that was in the city of Hollywood. And I think when we walked out of there, we probably shaved off $25 or $26 million just after an hour of being there and explaining, why do you have $10.4 million for hallways? And I asked, was it because of the retrofitting of an ELSS system for a wet sprinkler system? I could see where you're.
Oh, just dropped Senator Pizzo, but
yeah,
Bradley,
too. I can follow up because we were
Yeah.
there. And so we asked, is this $10 million for the hallway because of an ELSS upgrade? Answer was no.
Surprised a lot of people.
Yeah.
we lost you for a minute there, Senator Pizzo, but Senator Bradley was kind of filling in.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But the other, those are more global issues in terms of, the SIRS is including things that are not statutorily required. They're outside of the, the components that the legislature listed, down to really more practical considerations that boards are facing once they complete their SIRS. And that is that boards will have had an accounting method for their reserve accounts, whether it be a pooled account or a component accounting for the reserves. And now they have to manage those accounts, split those funds between SIRS items, which they can be pooled. They don't have to be, but they certainly can be, and non-SIRS items. So just the technical requirements of splitting up those funds and getting owners to agree on, the proper way to set those funds up is generally the first hurdle that a board is going to face once they complete their SIRS.
Yes, that's been one that's been hot on our list of questions as we complete the reserve studies. Is you may have some big items in your non-structural reserve. You may have elevators, for example, kind of don't meet the paragraph G list, but they could be millions of dollars to modernize or upgrade. And if you have something near term like an elevator, you want to make sure you're leaving some of your existing reserves there for that item, while also mandating or starting to fund those other structural items, which may be further out on the timeline, which means we don't put as much money in there, or vice versa. We may recommend putting more money into the structural side. The thing to keep in mind with the structural reserves, of course, is once they are set aside for structural purpose, there is no vote. There is nothing that can happen that can get them to be used for any other purpose. So that initial, I think two things I'm taking away from that is the initial definition of the funds and the additional definition of what is structure, for example. What are we putting in for structure? What definitions are we having there? And we've seen that kind of across the board, just difference in interpretation from the different engineers and professional.
And the legislature didn't co-opt everything that had to do with condos. We itemized those structural elements that they have to reserve for. Beyond that, if the elevator is not functional, the building isn't going to collapse. So beyond that, things like the pool and landscaping and painting, those are still the purview of the board. The SIRS is not exhaustive. Those are the items that are, the board has full discretion. They can include it, but what must be funded are the SIRS items. And beyond that, they have that ability and discretion to fund whatever they think is necessary for their building.
And Matt, I would mention not an insignificant element also is it's okay for owners and association members to ask their professionals, are they using the most current law? What we've seen, and now you see head nodding. Senator Bradley and I were up in Port St. Lucie, and we're seeing this slideshow presentation that was completely predicated on an old bill, old law, and and then to come to find out that what you've been relying on, and you have heartache over how much it's going to cost, and then come to find out it's not. Ask if this is the 2024 model that they're showing you on the showroom when they present these things.
Yeah, great point. And I mean, we did our first SIRS in 2022, so that report may look different than it would have today. Although some of the, I think some of the interpretations were more clarification of the things that we were doing. Yeah. But now it's 25 years. Anything within the next 25 years. Some studies I think have things out 100 years. Replacement of the foundation 200 years from now. Right. That's not the intent anymore. Not part of the most current law.
Yeah, and that was the result of going and listening to the implementation, and the issue in that we saw at that meeting was the foundation, right? So we listened. Look, if this component's has a useful life that's going to extend beyond 25 years, then just put aside what you need to maintain it. But you wouldn't need to do a full replacement, because in many situations that just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So there were tweaks. So make sure, you definitely want to make sure that your reserve study is consistent with the 24 model.
Great. One of the questions that we get a lot, and I've heard you speak about this on the committee floor, is pooling the reserves. And there's a question in our audience here is, what is the difference between a pooled or a non-pooled? Just very high level. Pooled reserves is a group of assets. So you might have one overall fund for your painting and your roofing and your electrical systems and your plumbing. You might have it all grouped in one set of funds, versus a component reserve, sometimes called a straight line reserve, where you've got an individual account for each item, and then those funds can only be used on that item. Is there anything that you know of in the law that says pooled reserves are or are not allowed?
They are allowed. Yes, you may pool, but if you pool your SIRS element, your subsection G, which we'll call our G items, but your SIRS items, your G items, they have to be pooled separately. You're free to have another pool, a second pool with your non-G, non-SIRS items, but G items and your SIRS items must be pooled together.
Correct, because if you don't separate them, then you don't know that you're not spending the money on an unauthorized purpose or something.
That's exactly right.
Yep. Great. Thanks for clarifying that for us.
Matt, I'm tracking some of these questions that you also have in the chat too. So Senator Bradley's answer just there on pooling might have spoke to Steve's question, and I'm jotting down notes on all of them if we want to dedicate some time at some point to addressing some of these. We have some answers and some positions on some of these things.
Great. Yes, we'll get to them. I've got a few more first, and then we're gonna get to all of those questions as well. Gotcha. One of the things that came up at the recent Condo Summit last week, which you guys held, and I thought was a great meeting of the minds in the industry, was the idea of a potential glide path on funding. We know the studies have to be done. I don't think the deadline is 2 weeks from now. I don't think that's going to go anywhere. But there is a call, I think, from some to ease up on the requirement for funding. What are your, I know, and this is your individual takes on it. I understand there's a whole 2 bodies of legislature and everything that has to go through this, but what are your thoughts after that conversation about the glide path? Do you think that's something that might be viable in future legislation of some sort on the funding side?
I think that what you will see from both chambers or consistently is there is what is non-negotiable is the idea that you have to have our buildings inspected and repaired, and buildings are going to have reserve requirements. Surfside fell in 2021. And it's been many years. The first bill passed in 22, several years ago. The legislature has been signaling for several years, reserves are coming. We are not changing the requirement to make sure you can get fully funded. Now, with that said, if there are ways, but the system has to work. And so I don't want to have a rush to fully fund based on a SIRS like we saw in Hollywood that's based on items that don't belong in the SIRS. So I would say accuracy over expediency, and let's make sure that the reserve studies are correct, that they're reviewed. I'd rather focus on making sure we have accurate reserves that owners can feel confident and rely on, make sure we have financing vehicles available for owners to make those repairs. But I haven't been presented with an idea that says, if we delay this 5 years, it's going to be better for condo owners. And I just don't believe that would be the case. But if there is some compelling argument to be made about that I have not heard or already considered not to be, have merit, then I'm all ears. I'll never say never, but it would be, I'd like to see a plan that makes sense.
That plan would have to include being able to enter the matrix and slow down time and put buildings in a bubble, effectively in a vacuum. And so what we like to sort of start and end with whenever we're on our roadshow is basically explaining to people that, yeah, we can go ahead and repeal everything in this book that has to do with condo law, right? That's not going to stop Father Time and Mother Nature. And really, it speaks to what the market's also going to require. It wasn't just the legislature sort of finally got reactive and paid attention to this stuff. It was the marketplace that went ahead and started requiring and taking closer looks at things. So to Senator Bradley's point, which is critical, and I think everybody, all sides should or does agree, especially in Tallahassee, is the following. Folks need to get an actual real-time snapshot of where they are. What's the health of it's an MRI, an X-ray, whatever you want to call it. They need a checkup, right? A lot of us delay it for too long. They need a checkup to see where they are. There's some immediate emergent needs, perhaps, or maybe there aren't. And then on the reserve side, putting away for reserves, separate and apart from milestone inspections and what it reveals. On the reserve side, I don't know, and I'm pretty in touch with the condo market and real estate right now and where we are. It's already been mentioned. The genie can't go back in the box. So people are now looking to see what the financial health and conditions, people actually paying attention now to where people are and whether or not they're doing it. But to Senator Bradley's point, which might have seemed like a little humorous, it's actually true. 5 years from now, we may have technology that obviates the needs for some of these things, and it can be done at a much lower cost, in which case that'll be a happy problem that you can stop paying reserves because we found a quick, innovative fix. Until then, we're still bricks and mortar, and we're still, our roof technology is not 22nd century yet.
That's right. And I like to remind people too, the roofs don't care about these laws at all. They're going to fail when they fail. And
right.
It's just a matter of whether you're going to pay it with a special assessment alone or do nothing, which is going to end up costing more in the long run. So I think it's the proactive boards, and most people grasp that. I think that's certainly glad to hear that there's thought, a lot of thought. Clearly, you guys put a lot of thought into that idea of when it's needed and how important it is.
And Matt, I just wanted to mention, and it's not like we're saying condo owners, you have to do this to help the landlord, that you're the tenant and you now have to go as some kind of serfdom and pay you are doing this to benefit your own asset, your own unit, your own building. As our building is now competing with the one next door for sales, the new spangled thing, or the next building over that is keeping reserves. So when you explain to people that by doing this now, so that when you go to sell, you're not going to have to reduce the price because you never paid any money for the roof that you used every day. And now I'm enforcing, if I'm a new owner buying in there, I'm going to take a look to Senator Pizzo's point. People are now paying attention to this. Wait a minute. You haven't fixed the roof. I know there's a special assessment that's going to be hitting. I haven't lived there yet. I'm offering you 50 grand less for your unit or whatever it is. So I do think that that this is a way that people are investing now in their own. We're not saying you're now paying the owner of the apartment and it's not yours. I had a guy the other day said, well, what if I pay all this money in reserves and then I die? Well, again, you're increasing the value of your asset that, into that's part of this.
Stabilizing at the very least. And one, I just throw this out there, and Senator Bradley gives a great analogy. I think she uses the pizza pieces analogy. There's 8 pieces, 8 years remaining on something. Folks need to understand, and maybe this is for board members and associations to help explain, and please reach out to us, for help on those explanations. But this is not like reserving for something that may or may not happen in the future. To be clear, I have identical twin 18-year-old boys. I started a college savings account for both of them at the exact same time. They're identical twins. And next year, one is going to college and one reports February 20th to Parris Island because he enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. So I was hoping they would both go to college. I'm proud of the one that's going to the Marines, but I don't necessarily need that college fund money right now because it can be put, but that's an event that may happen, not aging. And to understand this, each year that passes past when you replace something after a milestone, or you just did it for recertification, or you just did something, every year you're there, you're using one of its useful life years, right? People have this kind of idea that like, we just replaced the roof, it's got 25 years left, why do I have to reserve for it? Well, because it's 1/25 used after each year. You're basically using 4% of its useful life every year for the next 25 years. You're actually using it the time that you're there. And that's, I think, sometimes conceptually difficult for people to grasp.
And that's a great analogy. And to your point, this method is pay as you use. A condo owner needs to reserve for what they use every year. The prior model was just a game of hot potato. It was you live there and you move and you hope you move out before the big special assessment comes in for the roof. So you buy into an association. There was never a requirement to have a milestone reserve. You didn't have a SIRS requirement as a buyer. And there was a lot of unfairness in that model. You could move in and 18 months later be saddled with a huge assessment. And so this model that we're transitioning to is a pay as you use, very transparent, and there's a fundamental fairness there to owners and buyers that will be very stabilizing going forward.
Couldn't agree more. And let's stick with transparency for a moment. The last Bill 1021 that passed last year had a reporting requirement. And so we're really coming up in a couple of weeks until the deadline, like I said. So I just want to take an opportunity to remind everyone. And one of our questions kind of talked about the reporting requirement. The DBPR has a website up. They also have an email address where you can send the requirement is to essentially give the report or copy of the report, make a report available to every owner in your building. Every potential buyer will get a copy of this report as a part of a disclosure. And then also the division wants a statement that was completed and done. Right. One of the questions is about the project number. I think that's a division number that they assign so that they can kind of keep straight your property versus some of their other database records. There's just a lot of thousands, tens of thousands of condominiums in the state. I think the division, rightfully so, is sometimes challenged with identifying everybody that's out there. So that's brings me to another comment that I hear a lot is, the division won't know. They don't know about our little condo association on the beach. How, I'm not going to follow these requirements. We even had a couple that admitted to it in our poll here. Like we're not going to do it, or we haven't done it. No one will know. What would you say to a community that's kind of taken that approach?
Yeah, well, we walked into an association meeting last week when I was down in Miami for the summit, and the first question from the members that were there is, "What are you going to do to us if we don't do it? What's the who's going to punish us? What's going to happen to us?" And the simple answer is there are not penalties in this. We don't come down and send the police to the association, but when you go to sell, it's going to affect the marketability of your unit, because when you go to sell, you're not going to be able to provide a buyer to a copy of the SIRS and the milestone. If the association needs a loan, they're not going to be able likely without good reserves to be able to get a loan. If the milestone repairs aren't done, getting insurance is going to be prohibitively expensive, or they're not going to be able to get it. The ramifications are coming, and it really behooves the associations to step up and move through these processes. And, we're not sending the police, but, it will have a financial effect on every owner.
Yeah, I think
And
whether
I would say,
whether
Matt, I would just also add real quick that even if you're sitting here and you're thinking, well, I'm not going to be able to get it done in 2 weeks because there's nobody going to come out. So I wouldn't play the game, to Senator Bradley's point, then, well, I'm not going to be able to, to finish the assignment like we had in school. I'm not going to finish it in time, so I'm not going to do it at all. No, you still need to do it. It still needs to be done, even if it ends up where, okay, it wasn't done until February or March. It's still important to have done.
And board members have a fiduciary duty to use their best efforts and protect the association and act in the best interest of the association. So board members should be seeking to comply. We recognize that a lot of milestones were trying to be completed by the end of this year. And so we provided in the law where, look, if you're under contract and you're making a good faith attempt to comply, then that satisfies the requirement. Go ahead and get your milestone into early next year. Keep moving forward in the process. You'll need your SIRS before you adopt your budget after January 1, 2025. So there is a little time for associations to get those SIRS to be able to have them be included in their budget. But get started, get moving. As Travis said, just because the deadline passes, the requirement doesn't go away.
Right. And we knew early on there was probably more SIRS that needed to get done than reserve study providers out there. We've seen a huge influx in the market of new reserve study providers to fill the demand. And I think we probably got more done as an industry than we expected. We don't know exactly how many, but I would venture to guess we're over at least half buildings do have them done or will have them done. There has been some reports of issues. We filled up our queue very early. It was back in July when we said there's really no more availability for us to deliver these reports by the deadline, but yet we still are continuing to fill up a queue into the first half of next year. And so I think that there's, and the banks that I've talked to and some of the insurance folks that I've talked to have said they're going to probably take a similar reasonable approach, right? If a board's shown a good faith effort, even though it's not written in the law, if the board's shown a good faith effort to try to get this SIRS under contract and is in our queue, and it's our fault as an industry for not being able to get it done in time, then they'll be lenient as well and probably treat that as different as someone that willfully and knowingly just says we're not going to do it, we're not going to comply. We're running a little bit low on time. I wanted to ask one question, maybe of you, Senator Pizzo. I know you're very knowledgeable about the real estate market, and we've seen lots of articles claiming something called a condo crisis. Do you think we have a condo crisis?
No, I think we have we have a wake-up call. And I have to very often up here in Tallahassee, I have to vote against my own self-interest, which is fine. I'm a public servant, but in this particular circumstance, when people say condo crisis, I think there's a lot of condo confusion. And we'll take the blame for some of that and need to disseminate stuff, a lot of education for owners as well, in fairness to boards. But I need to be able to effectively market and sell something to my 39 other non-condo living colleagues. And a lot of the situations are places where people just went 30, 40 years without collecting any money. And I appreciate that it's a wild inconvenience to those buildings and communities that have been running correctly, that have been reserving the money that they should be and doing what they should. At the same token, none of what we pass should then come at a major inconvenience because they've already been doing this. They've already been employing these best practices. But no, the transaction amounts are basically mirroring the same. But yeah, 90% of the new listings year over year from last year that have entered the market in the condo space are 30 years or older. And some people are looking to get out. And when we go into the chat session, I'm seeing a number of related questions. Someone asking, can I get credit for some of the reserves I pay in? Can I not? But understand, if you have two similarly situated buildings and one has been doing everything they're supposed to be doing for 30 years and one has done nothing, well, you can characterize it how you want, but does the owner of the building that's done everything in good faith, are they getting a premium, or is this unit that's exactly the same style building, size building, are they at a discount? Classify it however you want, but as far as condo crisis go, we have plenty of transactions on much older stuff and much newer stuff. It's the in between where that's all that neglect.
And Matt, if we have a condo crisis, I'd say we have condo challenges. But if we have condo challenges now, what existed prior to Surfside was absolutely a challenge too. I mean, buildings had no reserves, there was no transparency, there was no inspections, they were unsafe, people were getting big special assessment. I mean, what existed prior to Surfside was far from ideal. It's not as though everything has just been going along swimmingly and we change the rules. This is a much needed change in a system that has been lacking oversight for far too long. So challenge, yes, but it's historically been a big challenge in many parts of the state anyway.
Couldn't agree more. And I just want to take a moment too to recognize there are a lot of great, well-run associations out there too, and there was before.
Most of mine in my district,
majority, right?
Yeah.
Most of mine in my district are perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's what we're seeing as well. The communities that we've worked with for a long time, they're not seeing a big impact from this.
Right.
It's the ones that had made less than responsible decisions
Right.
in the past that are now facing the bigger bill, right? Just like if we don't go to the doctor for years and years, or we don't go to the dentist, that is going to catch up with us. Just we don't take our car in for maintenance. It's common sense, and unfortunately, it's bad news for some folks that are in those positions that maybe weren't well informed. But I couldn't agree more that it is no more of a crisis than it always has been. That's very well put.
Can we get to some of these chat questions?
Yeah, please. I don't know you're
we can fire off. I'll start midway bottom, whatever. Senator Bradley, if you can go in there and answer a couple.
I can't see the chat because I'm on. Throw the question out and I'll jump in, but I can't see it because I'm on my phone.
Okay. If a condo, this is from Josie. If a condo is contracted with a company to complete the reserves, it will not be completed until next year. Is this okay? Josie, yes. And this is being recorded where Senator Bradley and Senator Pizzo are saying, yes, that's okay. You're doing what you possibly can, given the limited capacity and availability of people like Matt are fully booked for the year. Their dance card's full. The cost of insurance is driving more of the challenge versus SIRS. Senator Bradley and I would agree with you. And there's an article in the Miami Herald today saying just that, and apparently some industry people disagree with that assertion. Scott Kula, Senator Bradley, you can answer this one. We have been fully funded, never waived components in our reserve plan, including the required items. We use pooled reserves and threshold funding. The legislation makes us separate SIRS and non-SIRS items. Just because of the math, this increases our reserve funding requirements a lot. Why cannot we continue to pool SIRS and non-SIRS items in one fund and reduce the funding requirements?
That is an issue that I have not heard before, but that is an excellent question, because those are the kinds of issues that we want to take into next session, where if you have two pooled reserves and it's going to result in higher reserves and higher costs to the owners, but we can still have two functioning pools. Those are issues we are open to. We're not looking to add the cost to that. I had not heard that issue. I'm taking notes on that.
Yeah,
Michael Woods. Sorry, Michael Woods, for Condom Association, can we have a buyers pay a fee that in effect pays a portion of the reserves that have already been paid into? Like I said, characterize it as a premium and that you're getting when you sell versus a discount. It's really no different, folks, than if you got a home inspection on your unit and there was useful life remaining on appliances that were mentioned in the home inspection, you might look for a credit at the sale, or might be asking for a discount at the sale. It's really kind of not a different situation. What are the difference between SIRS and milestone report? Owen, good question. Very basic one. Go ahead, Senator Bradley.
There are two requirements in the new law. The first is all the buildings have to get inspected at 30 years. If you're a condo 3 stories or higher, at 30 years and to every 10 years thereafter, you have to have an engineering report of your building. That is looking for existing damage, existing structural deficiencies. And then concurrent with that, you'll also, for every condo over 3 stories, regardless of age, you will have a SIRS report done. And those are that's sort of your savings account going forward to make sure that you have the money on hand to replace the roof when it's at the end of its useful life, that you can waterproof appropriately. So Milestone is looking for existing deficiencies, and the SIRS is a going forward savings account to make sure that we don't see the deferred maintenance. When we have engineers go out and look at the buildings, the vast majority of the structural problems is from deferred maintenance and people not keeping the building up.
Nima Morjani, Senator Bradley and I agree with you. You indicated that hurricane insurance is the most expensive and challenging, takes up a third of your budget. How do we manage this alongside the SIRS? What we can have some part in controlling and steering are certain insurance requirements and allowances in the state. Again, we can't slow down Father Time in the components of your building, but we don't disagree with you, and that's what we're going to be working on this upcoming session. We just got our committee assignments. I'm on banking and insurance. Go figure.
I have not seen mine yet, but that's interesting. Okay.
I'll let you know where they are. They're pretty good.
Okay.
How often does Florida require the SIRS and non-SIRS reports to be issued? Our on-site visit for these 2 reports was issued July 24. When are the next reports required?
So SIRS is that your SIRS report is every 10 years is when you have to have a SIRS done. But I recommend that you do, I mean, condo associations have always done reserve studies. They're budget tools. They've always done reserve studies. This is just a particular statutorily required reserve study. But I encourage associations to continue to get their reserve studies on the recommended schedule, which is every 3 to 5 years. Keep them updated. But the legislature is only stepping in every 10 years.
And of course, prices of things change, go up, commodities have been, going nuts, and then they shoot up, they shoot down. So it's always good to refresh and make sure that you guys are on the right path and that certain costs are associated. Joseph, is the fire sprinkler system a part of the structural reserve? Travis?
I'm sorry. No, unless it is a structural item that is going to cost more than $10,000, then it's in that catch-all, or part of the plumbing system where your pipes have to be redone, et cetera, et cetera. But there's nothing in the in G that would require. Matt, am I wrong on that?
Yep, you are. Sorry.
And you asked. And you asked, what is a G item, Senator Bradley? What do you mean by G item? You mean like OG?
G items are the element or the components that have to be reserved for in your structural integrity reserve study.
Where is this letter G? Where is it?
It's subsection G in the statute. And so it's roof, structural systems, fire protection, plumbing, electric, waterproof and paint, windows, exterior doors, items over 10,000 that affect those aforementioned.
All right,
So
Matt, correct me on the fire sprinkler stuff.
Yeah, so that if you have one existing, it's fire protection systems, which is on the list.
Okay.
If you don't,
but I meant on the retrofitting, right?
Folks, some of your buildings that don't have wet sprinkler systems may be going ahead to put the wet sprinkler systems in, which is going to be an additional very high cost to unit owners based on the retrofit, which might also have attendant renovation costs to the areas that are being disrupted and disturbed. I was not a fan of it. I didn't see the actuarial science behind it. I actually looked to delay that plan because I thought that it was not going to reduce insurance premiums on life safety, but it was very popular for vendors to push legislators to insist that happen. I apologize. I'm not for it. Steve, can the cash designated for SIRS and non-SIRS be commingled in one bank account? The 2 balances would be controlled in the general ledger. The answer is no. Senator Bradley, good.
So your SIRS elements, your G items that we described, they may be pooled. They don't have to be, they may be, but they need to be segregated from your non-structural, non-G items.
Alana had a question, a long one, but I'll just go fast forward. We want to hear from you directly, or your state senator should hear from you directly, who may ask us. We want to hear about the elderly on fixed income that feel like they have no way to finance these things. We actually want to hear from them. We've even had credit unions in Florida step forward to say, hey, we'd like to get in this space. We're very interested in this space. We don't need to tap the equity that someone has in the unit. So yeah, we have a lot of situations where we have folks that may have moved into a building when they were 50 and they had earning potential, and now they're 80 and they're on a fixed income or Social Security. but a lot of them have 100% equity. I discourage anyone from even considering a reverse mortgage if unless it's something that they're walking eyes wide open into, but it's not always necessary. And there are plenty of financing options and other things that we may be exploring. Matt, you asked about a glide path, but Senator Bradley and I may propose some other financing options for some of these, or what qualifies as being able and solvent to do these things. So we want to hear from the octogenarians on fixed income and what their current situation is. Alana, the first suggestion would be take a hard look at that SIRS study and make sure within the four corners of it, it actually has items on there that are structural in nature.
Right. And gives you the time to fund it. I think that's one thing that we're seeing on a few of these.
Matt, do you submit the SIRS to the state, or is the association supposed to?
So the copy of the SIRS doesn't have to go to the state, even though it's on the DBPR's form, I don't think. But
Notice of completion.
The statement is that you've completed it and presented it to the membership. Reserve study companies don't present it to the membership. That's the association board's responsibility to do that. So
that should answer Kathleen's question. Okay.
Yeah.
In
Steve,
that order, I can answer Michael Wood's question. I don't know where if owners are responsible for windows, are we required to reserve for them? And the answer is no. If your documents say, and we made that specific change in 154, and that's again goes to Senator Pizzo's point of making sure you're using the updated law, because that was not how it was originally done in 4D, but in 154 it said for those components that you are not responsible for, then you don't have to reserve for, the association doesn't have to reserve for something that you're not responsible to replace or maintain.
Okay. The seawall is only part of a SIRS item if its failure to maintain it would have an impact on the structure itself. So if the seawall is right up against the foundation, our engineers will probably put it in. If it's on the other side of the golf course, not.
Similarly with pools. We see it in the issue of pools. If it sits atop 3 stories of a parking deck, it's going to be in your SIRS. If it's off, then with no structural, then not going to be.
The commercial, the one Barbara asked at 1251, what about commercial association? This is just for residential and the word residential is throughout. Again, I mean, I think for any owner, they would want to know a financial plan. They should do them, but it's not required. There's not a requirement for a SIRS or a reserve study for a commercial.
Aaron brought up a question, and I'm glad you brought up elevators. They may not be structural, but for buildings over 4 stories, they are vital, especially for older individuals, given what you all have learned in the last 2 years since passing this legislation. Are there elements in the SIRS definitions for which changes are being proposed in 2025? Aaron, I live in a building where sometimes both elevators are out, and I live on the 22nd floor. I can assure you that I suffer this inconvenience a lot. Theoretically, you can take the stairs. Is it tantamount to being really, uninhabitable for a lot of people at a particular time? Yeah, absolutely. But it's not going to bring down the building. Again, a lot of things floating around, but the central idea and purpose is for for myself or for my colleagues or any of you to ever have to stand over a pile of dead bodies. And so that doesn't happen from the elevator not working. And it's just so fluid and weird, the whole elevator market, to be honest with you. The contracts, the players, it's something we're going to delve into.
Parts from one particular vendor. I mean, it's weird.
A lot of it's by design. It's very strange.
And on Adina asked, may associations seek / contract for more than one SIRS report, i.e. board members feel like the initial SIRS report may not have the 224 model? And the answer is yes. In fact, we were part of these meetings that we were at last week. A guy stood up and said, we got one and it said this from a company, literally our sister building. I mean, right next door, we share a pool. They got one and it was different. He said today, hey, we contracted for another one. We paid the money. It's wildly different. We're going to go with that because it's actually accurate. So.
And if you see discrepancies in your SIRS, reach out to your preparer, provide them inspections that you may have done in the past, put them in touch with contractors who have worked in the building recently. And what we have found is a lot of the SIRS providers will take that additional documentation and information, maybe make adjustments. But if you cannot get, I hate for everybody to go out and just buy a second one, but try to resolve it first with your SIRS preparer. And if that just does not reach your level of satisfaction, then there's no legal infirmity to go out and get a second SIRS or a third, but you have to rely on a SIRS to do your budget by the end of 25.
Matt, do you want to take this Josie Ferris to 1249 question about the SIRS components? Yes, they can be pulled. Yes, they can only be spent on SIRS components.
Is this considered fully funded?
Yeah,
so fully funded. Yeah. We've got another webinar on fully funded. It's a very confusing topic, and I think as long as you're following a cash flow that keeps your reserves from going negative, you are fully funded, even though that doesn't meet some national definitions of fully funded. The idea is not to have all the money on hand right away. It's to have the money when you're there in a stable, equitable plan that's consistent from year to year, instead of we've seen some crazy things in our SIRS studies. Some not ours, but other firms received like deferred special assessments and kind of weird ramp up periods. Like there's some stuff there that just is not quite consistent with our national standards, and so but most of it we'll see fully funded. But please echo what Senator Bradley said. Reach out to me, even if we didn't do the SIRS. Happy to take a look and try to help guide you in some of the good questions to ask to help everybody figure this out.
Listen, leverage the fact that you got stuck on a Zoom with Senator Bradley and I today. If you have a question that you don't want to go have an expensive, inconvenient, time-sensitive kind of situation, go ahead. There's nothing wrong with going back to your reserve company and saying, hey, I was just on a Zoom related to condo stuff. Are there any updates with the most recent law that passed that you want to perhaps take a look at and clean up on our report before we move forward? At least get them to think about it or to ask, especially when they're referencing bill numbers and dates and all that stuff. I feel like, hey, I just got off of Zoom. I just want to make sure, are you using the most recent current law in place?
That's a good point.
With what you gave us with your work product. That costs nothing.
And to board members and who are receiving these reports and reserve specialists who are preparing these reports, itemize and clearly bifurcate in those reports. These are the SIRS items and these are the non-SIRS items. Because I've seen SIRS where it's blended, and it really makes it difficult for owners to know what they're voting on, what they have to vote on, what they have to incorporate. Those elements should be very distinct. The SIRS elements and things like the landscaping, the standalone pool, possibly the seawall. Those are items that the board has discretion on. And those reports need to provide clarity and transparency for the owners. When they're all mixed together, it really puts owners in a bind to be able to know how they should move forward.
Matt, you're not uploading. Joan McCabe asked, the SIRS report need not to be submitted to the DBPR. If the completion of the SIRS is reported on the DBPR website, you were asked to upload a copy of the report. If you report it by sending a form by mail or email, you're not required to submit the report. Why is there a difference?
Yeah, I mean, the DBPR form, I've asked them, why they put that on there. They wanted a copy. You can submit the DBPR form online without attaching the report. It says it's required, but I'll tell you now, you just don't attach the report, submit the form.
We'll have that. We'll look into that and have that cleaned up. Yeah. Karen Ingolia, and I'm saying it the Italian way because we have a Senator Ingolia. Some HOAs require new owners to contribute a lump sum contribution. Senator Bradley, we were talking about this recently. A lump sum contribution to reserves. My understanding, condos are not able to do this. A change in the law would help fund condo reserves. There are some buildings I believe that do. It might be more on a co-op basis, I think, but it's something to consider, except some people make the argument that you've just increased the price of my unit and therefore made it more difficult for me to sell by requiring of a subsequent owner going forward. But it's something to consider, or something that, to be held.
Yeah, and I think you would distinguish the lump sum from a balloon payment. So lump sum, you may have your milestone done, but you've got a lot of work to do on your milestone, and you're so underfunded on your reserves that you need to kind of get them a head start so you can get on track. So they may require a certain amount X up front, but what you shouldn't see is on year 10 of your SIRS, every owner having to step up paying $100,000. That is the lump sum. It should be at the front end, if at all, to pay for your milestone. But you shouldn't be seeing balloon payments in out years on your SIRS.
Boy, this has been action-packed and great, and we're just realizing we're well over time. So out of respect to the Senator's time, everyone's time, I think we should wrap. Unless you want to keep going on the questions, I can get back to them via email. We'll have their emails and send them off as well if there's other things we can provide. Any closing thoughts as we wrap up? And thank you again.
Well, thank you, and the speed with which the industry has rallied behind and gotten these reserve studies done and reached out, asked for clarification from the reserve advisors to the accountants, to the engineers, to the architects. While it hasn't been hiccup free, I think it's really been tremendous the progress that we have seen in a few short years. And it's something that I'm proud of and that we will continue to work through and get right. But really the professionals in this space deserve a lot of credit for the incredible amount of work they've done in a short period of time.
The ones doing it right, like Matt, not the ones that I'm looking of ways to put in jail, that
Yes.
are price gouging and just trying to get into it because they see a lot of money flowing around.
Yes.
Matt, if you want to catalog some of these questions, I'm happy to get back to it. Doug D'Agostino was actually was the very first question that we didn't get to, and it's about the fairness and equity and why does a 3-story building with 15 or 18 units have to do the same as a 20-story building with 50 or 100 units. And he's a CPA and civil engineer, and that's a long discussion I'm happy to have with that requires longer treatment. If you want to catalog some of these questions, I'm happy to get back to any of these folks, and please share our email. It's our last name dot our first name at flsenate.gov. So it's pizzo.jason@flsenate.gov, and it's Bradley.Jennifer at flsenate.gov. So we'll get back to everybody.
We actually answer our email, so you can send and you will actually hear back.
Yes, from us. Yeah.
Impressive group.
You don't trust anyone else's grammar in responding. I think that's probably why we do that. Thanks,
thank
everybody.
you again. Yeah, thank you again.
Be continued. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Appreciate it. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.